Sarah Mitchell stepped off the bus at Fort Harrison with her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility as dozens of other recruits shuffled toward the registration building. At 28, she was older than most of the fresh-faced young men and women around her. But that was exactly what made her perfect for this mission. Her real name wasn't Sarah Mitchell. And this wasn't her first time at a military training facility. Captain Elena Vasquez had spent the last 8 years as part of an elite special operations unit that didn't officially exist. She had conducted covert missions in 12 countries, spoke 4 languages fluently, and could take down an armed opponent in under 30 seconds. But today, she was just another recruit trying to make it through basic training. The mission briefing had been simple enough. Intelligence suggested that someone within the training command was selling military secrets to foreign contacts. The leak had compromised 2 operations overseas, and 3 good agents were now dead. Elena's job was to get inside, identify the source, and gather enough evidence for a conviction. What made it complicated was that the suspect could be anyone from the commanding officers to the drill instructors to the support staff. Elena had spent months preparing for this assignment. She had studied the background of Sarah Mitchell, a fictional character created by the Intelligence Division. According to her files, Sarah was from a small town in Ohio, had worked various jobs since high school, and was joining the military to find direction in her life. She was supposed to be average, unremarkable, the kind of person who would blend into the crowd of new recruits. As she stood in line for processing, Elena observed everything around her. The other recruits were nervous, excited, some clearly homesick already. She noted the positions of security cameras, the layout of the buildings visible from the courtyard, and the behavioral patterns of the staff members moving between buildings. Old habits died hard, even when she was supposed to be playing the role of a civilian. Next, called the processing clerk, and Elena stepped forward with her carefully prepared documents. The clerk, a bored-looking corporal, barely glanced at her paperwork before stamping it and pointing her toward the medical building. Building C, follow the yellow line on the floor. The medical examination was routine, designed to ensure recruits were physically capable of handling the demands of training. Elena had to be careful here. Her body bore the subtle marks of her real profession, small scars from shrapnel, calluses in specific places from weapons training, muscle development that suggested advanced combat experience. She had spent weeks before the mission doing lighter workouts and using makeup to hide some of the more obvious signs. "Any previous military experience?" asked the medic, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "No, ma'am," Elena replied, maintaining the slightly nervous tone she had practiced. "This is all new to me." The medic nodded and continued her examination. Elena passed without any red flags being raised. Another small victory in what she knew would be a challenging operation after medical processing. The new recruits were herded into a large assembly hall where they would meet their drill instructors for the first time. Elena took a seat in the middle of the group, not too eager in the front row, not hiding in the back. She needed to be forgettable. The doors at the front of the hall burst open, and 3 drill instructors marched in with the precision and intensity that Elena remembered well from her own legitimate military training years ago. The lead instructor was Sergeant First Class Marcus Torres, a man in his mid-40s with the bearing of someone who had seen combat. Behind him came Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, whose reputation for being particularly hard on female recruits was well known, and Sergeant David Chun, the youngest of the 3 but known for his creative punishment exercises. "Listen up, maggots," Torres bellowed, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "For the next 12 weeks, your pathetic civilian lives are over. You belong to us now, and we're going to turn you into soldiers whether you like it or not." Elena had heard variations of this speech before, but she watched the faces of her fellow recruits as they experienced it for the first time. Some looked terrified, others excited, a few seemed to be questioning their life choices. She made sure her own expression showed the appropriate mix of nervousness and determination. "You will be divided into 4 platoons," Torres continued. "Each platoon will compete against the others in every aspect of training. The platoon that performs best will receive privileges. The platoon that performs worst will receive extra motivation in the form of additional training hours. The assignments were called out, and Elena found herself in 3rd Platoon under the direct supervision of Staff Sergeant Walsh. She had read Walsh's file during her preparation. The woman had served 2 tours overseas and had a reputation for being particularly demanding of female recruits, apparently believing that women had to work twice as hard to prove themselves worthy of serving alongside men. As 3rd Platoon was dismissed to collect their gear and report to their barracks, Elena noticed Walsh watching her with particular interest. It wasn't unusual for drill instructors to single out recruits who seemed different or potentially problematic, but Elena made a mental note to be extra careful around the staff sergeant. The barracks were exactly what Elena expected: rows of bunk beds in a large, open room with minimal privacy and even less comfort. She was assigned a bottom bunk near the middle of the room, which was perfect for her purposes. She would be able to observe most of the other recruits, while not being too isolated or too prominent. Her bunkmate was a young woman named Jessica from California, who seemed genuinely excited about military life. As Elena unpacked her carefully chosen belongings, nothing too expensive or sophisticated, everything consistent with Sarah Mitchell's supposed background, Jessica chattered nervously about her hopes and fears for the training ahead. "I heard Staff Sergeant Walsh is really tough," Jessica said, lowering her voice. "My cousin went through training here 2 years ago and said she made life miserable for all the girls." Elena nodded sympathetically while mentally cataloging this information. If Walsh had a pattern of targeting female recruits, it might provide cover for Elena's own activities. But it could also make her mission more difficult if she became a specific target for harassment. As the day progressed, Elena settled into her role as Sarah Mitchell. She made small talk with other recruits, shared fake stories about her civilian life, and did her best to project the image of someone who was nervous but determined to succeed. All the while, she was gathering intelligence about the facility, the staff, and the other recruits who might somehow be connected to the security leak she had been sent to investigate. The wake-up call came at 0500 hours with the explosive sound of Staff Sergeant Walsh banging a metal trash can with a wooden stick. Elena was already awake, as her internal clock had adjusted years ago to function on minimal sleep, but she made sure to look startled and disoriented like the other recruits scrambling out of their bunks. "Rise and shine, ladies," Walsh screamed, moving through the barracks like a storm. "You have exactly 4 minutes to get dressed and form up. Outside for morning PT, anyone not in formation gets to enjoy. Extra exercise time while the rest of you eat breakfast." Elena pulled on her PT uniform with practiced efficiency, but not too quickly. She helped Jessica, who was struggling with her bootlaces while still half asleep, and made sure to look like she was hurrying just as much as everyone else. The key to deep cover was consistency, never standing out, never being the best or the worst at anything. Outside, the morning air was crisp and fog hung low over the training grounds. 3rd Platoon formed up in 4 rows, with Elena positioning herself in the 2nd row, where she could observe both the instructors and her fellow recruits. Walsh walked up and down the formation, making minor corrections to posture and spacing, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Today begins your transformation from pathetic civilians into United States soldiers," Walsh announced. "Some of you will succeed. Many of you will fail and wash out. That's not my problem. My job is to push you hard enough to find out which category you belong in." The morning physical training began with a 2-mile run around the base perimeter. Elena had to carefully pace herself. Her actual fitness level would have put her near the front of the pack with ease, but Sarah Mitchell was supposed to be an average civilian. She stayed in the middle of the group, breathing hard enough to look challenged, but not so much that she appeared to be struggling seriously. About halfway through the run, she noticed something interesting. Recruit Morrison, a young man who had claimed to be a college football player, was falling behind despite his impressive physical build. His running form was all wrong, and he was clearly not in the kind of shape his background suggested he should be. Elena made a mental note to learn more about him. After the run came calisthenics in the courtyard behind the barracks. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, mountain climbers, all standard exercises that Elena could perform perfectly but chose to execute with just enough struggle to maintain her cover. She grunted with effort, took short breaks when allowed, and made sure her form looked like that of someone learning these movements for the first time. "Mitchell!" Walsh's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. Elena looked up from her push-up position to see the staff sergeant standing directly over her. "Is this supposed to be a push-up, or are you trying to take a nap down there?" "Sorry, Staff Sergeant," Elena replied, adjusting her form to look slightly better but still imperfect. "Give me 20 more, and this time do them right. The rest of you, take note. Proper form isn't optional, it's mandatory." Elena completed the additional push-ups while Walsh watched critically. This was exactly the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid, but she handled it by looking frustrated with herself and determined to improve. Around her, other recruits were getting similar individual attention, so she wasn't being singled out specifically. After PT came breakfast in the mess hall, which gave Elena her first chance to observe the broader facility operations. She noted the kitchen staff, the security procedures, and the way information flowed through the building. The food service workers included both military personnel and civilian contractors, any of whom could potentially have access to sensitive information during breakfast. Elena sat with Jessica and 2 other recruits from their platoon, a quiet young man named Rodriguez from Texas and an older woman named Thompson who had joined the military after losing her civilian job. The conversation was typical of new recruits: nervousness about the training ahead, homesickness, and speculation about the instructors. "I heard Sergeant Chun made his last platoon do push-ups in the mud for 3 hours because someone forgot to make their bunk properly," Thompson said, picking at her scrambled eggs. "That's nothing," Rodriguez replied. "My brother went through training at Fort Benning and said his drill sergeant made them low crawl through an obstacle course backwards because someone talked during formation." Elena listened while contributing, just enough to the conversation to seem engaged. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, helped her understand the culture and expectations of the training environment. More importantly, they gave her insight into how information spread among the recruits and what kinds of things they paid attention to. After breakfast came the first formal training session in a large classroom where they would learn about military history, protocol, and basic soldier skills. Elena took careful notes, not because she needed to learn the material, but because it helped maintain her cover and gave her an excuse to write down observations about the people around her. The instructor was Master Sergeant Collins, a career soldier who had clearly given this presentation many times before. Elena watched him carefully, noting his mannerisms, the way he interacted with different recruits, and whether he seemed to have any particular interests or weaknesses that might make him a security risk. During a break in the presentation, Collins called for questions. Several recruits raised their hands, asking basic questions about military life and training expectations. Elena raised her hand as well, asking a simple question about leave policies that Sarah Mitchell would reasonably want to know, but that also allowed her to gauge Collins' personality and teaching style. "Good question, Mitchell," Collins replied after answering. "Shows you're thinking ahead. That's the kind of forward planning that makes good soldiers." The afternoon brought their first taste of actual military drill and ceremony, learning to march in formation, basic facing movements, and the fundamentals of military bearing. This was more challenging for Elena because her body wanted to fall into the precise movements of her actual training, while she needed to look like someone learning these skills for the first time. Staff Sergeant Walsh was particularly critical during drill practice, stopping the formation repeatedly to make corrections. Elena made sure to make believable mistakes, starting to turn the wrong direction, taking a step at the wrong time, looking confused during complex movements. It was harder than it seemed, because making realistic mistakes required her to understand the correct techniques well enough to deliberately execute slightly wrong versions. Mitchell, you're thinking too much, Walsh called out after Elena hesitated during a facing movement. Don't analyze it, just do it. Trust your instincts. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Her instincts were precisely the problem. Her instincts wanted to execute these movements with the precision of her special operations training. Instead, she nodded and tried again, this time with what looked like natural improvement rather than perfect execution. During afternoon break, Elena overheard an interesting conversation between two support staff members. They were discussing schedule changes and mentioned something about the colonel's special briefings that happened in Building D after normal duty hours. Elena made a mental note to investigate Building D and find out what kinds of briefings might be happening there. The day ended with evening chow, more study time, and preparation for the next day's training. As Elena lay in her bunk that night, listening to the quiet conversations and occasional snores of her fellow recruits, she reviewed what she had learned on her first day. Walsh seemed to be genuinely focused on training, rather than hiding anything suspicious, though Elena would need more time to be certain. Morrison's background didn't match his apparent fitness level, which was worth investigating. The support staff had access to various parts of the base and might have opportunities to gather sensitive information, and there were after-hours activities happening in parts of the facility that weren't part of the standard training program. Elena closed her eyes and began planning her approach for the days ahead. She needed to build relationships with other recruits who might have useful information, find opportunities to explore the facility beyond the standard training areas, and identify which staff members had access to the kinds of sensitive information that could be valuable to foreign contacts. The mission was just beginning, and she had already seen that maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence would be more challenging than her briefing had suggested. By the end of the first week, Elena had established herself as a competent but unremarkable recruit. She performed well enough in training to avoid negative attention, but not so well as to stand out from the group. This careful balance allowed her to observe the facility and its personnel while maintaining her cover as Sarah Mitchell. The routine was becoming familiar: early morning PT, breakfast, classroom instruction, practical training exercises, and evening study time. Elena used each part of the day to gather different types of intelligence. During PT, she observed the physical layout of the base and noted security procedures. In the classroom, she studied the instructors and support staff. During meals, she listened to conversations and picked up gossip about personnel and operations staff. Sergeant Walsh continued to be particularly demanding of the female recruits, but Elena began to notice patterns in her behavior that seemed more focused on genuine training than anything suspicious. Walsh pushed harder because she genuinely believed it would make them better soldiers. Her criticism was harsh but fair, and she showed no signs of being involved in anything beyond her official duties. Sergeant Chun, however, was beginning to interest Elena more. During practical training exercises, she noticed he often stepped away to take phone calls, always moving to areas where he couldn't be overheard. When he returned, he sometimes seemed distracted or agitated. It could be personal issues, but Elena's training had taught her to pay attention to behavioral anomalies. The recruit, Morrison, continued to be a puzzle as well. His claimed background as a college athlete didn't match his physical performance or his knowledge of sports when other recruits brought up the topic. During conversations, he seemed to have detailed knowledge of military equipment and procedures that went beyond what they had been taught so far. Elena began to wonder if Morrison might be more than he appeared to be. On Thursday evening, Elena finally had an opportunity to investigate Building D, where she had overheard mention of the colonel's special briefings. After evening chow, she volunteered for additional cleaning duties, which gave her a legitimate reason to move around areas of the base that recruits normally wouldn't visit after hours. Building D was a modest administrative structure that housed various support offices during the day. Elena approached it carefully, using shadows and service routes to avoid the regular security patrols. The building was locked, but the security was standard commercial locks rather than high-security military hardware, which told her that Whatever happened, there wasn't considered highly sensitive. Using skills from her special operations training, Elena was able to examine the exterior of the building without triggering any alarms. She noted that several offices had lights on despite the late hour, and there were 3 civilian vehicles parked behind the building in addition to the usual military vehicles. Through a partially open window, she could hear voices but couldn't make out specific words. Elena was careful not to stay too long or take any risks that might compromise her mission. After gathering what intelligence she could from the exterior, she returned to her assigned cleaning duties and made her way back to the barracks without incident. Friday brought a new type of training, weapons familiarization. Elena had been both anticipating and dreading this session. Her special operations background included extensive training with various weapon systems, and she would need to be extremely careful not to demonstrate skills that Sarah Mitchell shouldn't possess. The session took place on the base's firing range under the supervision of Master Sergeant Collins and 2 additional instructors Elena hadn't met before. The recruits were introduced to the basic service rifle and taught fundamental safety procedures, loading, aiming, and firing techniques. Elena positioned herself in the middle of the group and listened attentively as Collins explained the basics of marksmanship. When it came time for her practical exercises, she deliberately made the kinds of mistakes a civilian would make, flinching at the sound, having trouble with the stance, missing the target entirely on her first few shots. "Mitchell, you're jerking the trigger," Collins called out after watching her fire a magazine. "Squeeze it straight back, slow and steady. Don't anticipate the shot." Elena nodded and adjusted her technique to show gradual improvement. By the end of the session, she was hitting the target consistently, but not with any particular accuracy. It was exactly the kind of performance expected from a new recruit with no previous experience. During the weapons training, Elena noticed something else interesting about Morrison. When handling the rifle, his movements were confident and practiced, despite his claims of being a civilian. He held the weapon correctly without being taught. His stance was natural, and his finger discipline was perfect. These were subtle signs that most people wouldn't notice, but Elena's training made them obvious after the weapons session. Elena made an excuse to stay behind and help clean up equipment. This gave her an opportunity to overhear a conversation between Collins and one of the other instructors about ammunition inventory discrepancies. They were discussing missing rounds and trying to figure out if it was a paperwork error. If there was an actual security problem, Elena filed this information away as potentially relevant to her mission. If someone was stealing ammunition, it could indicate a larger security breach or criminal activity within the training facility. That evening, during free time, Elena struck up a conversation with Morrison. She approached it carefully, playing the role of a curious fellow recruit rather than someone conducting an investigation. "You did really well at the range today," she said, sitting down next to him in the common area. "Have you done much shooting before?" Morrison looked momentarily uncomfortable before answering. "Not really. Just picked it up quickly, I guess. You seemed to struggle a bit at first." "Yeah, I've never even held a gun before coming here," Elena replied, maintaining her cover story. "It's pretty intimidating. I was surprised how natural you looked with it." "Beginner's luck, probably," Morrison said, but his tone suggested he wanted to end the conversation. He made an excuse about needing to study and walked away, leaving Elena more convinced that he was hiding something about his background. Elena spent the rest of the evening reviewing what she had learned so far. She had identified several potential leads worth investigating further. Chun's suspicious behavior during phone calls, the after-hours activities in Building D, the ammunition discrepancies, and Morrison's questionable background. She also needed to expand her investigation to include more of the support staff and civilian contractors who had access to the base. The challenge was that she was still in the early stages of training, which limited her freedom of movement and her opportunities to investigate without risking her cover. She needed to find ways to gather more intelligence while maintaining the routine and performance expected of recruit. Sarah Mitchell. Elena also realized that she needed to be more systematic in her approach. Rather than following random leads as they appeared, She should focus on identifying who had access to the kinds of sensitive information that had been compromised, what opportunities they would have had to pass that information to outside contacts, and what their motivations might be. As she lay in her bunk that night, Elena listened to the quiet breathing of her fellow recruits and began planning her next moves. The weekend would bring different routines and possibly new opportunities to gather intelligence. She needed to use every advantage while being careful not to arouse suspicion about her own activities. The mission was becoming more complex than she had initially expected, with multiple potential leads and suspects. But Elena's special operations training had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenging environment where success depended on patience, careful observation, and the ability to adapt to unexpected developments while maintaining perfect cover. The second week of training brought more intensive practical exercises and Elena's first real test of maintaining her cover under extreme pressure. 3rd Platoon was scheduled for a 3-day field training exercise that would take them away from the main base and into a realistic combat simulation environment. Elena saw this as both an opportunity and a risk. The field exercise would give her chances to observe the instructors and other personnel in different circumstances, but it would also make it harder to maintain her carefully calibrated performance as an average recruit. In field conditions, her special operations training would want to take over automatically. Monday morning began with equipment issue and preparation for departure. Elena made sure to look appropriately overwhelmed by the amount of gear they were being given: field pack, sleeping bag, tactical vest, additional supplies, and ammunition for the exercises they would be conducting. She asked basic questions about how to properly fit and adjust equipment, playing the role of someone learning these skills for the first time. Staff Sergeant Walsh was particularly intense during the preparation phase, checking each recruit's equipment personally and making sharp comments about their readiness level. When she reached Elena, Walsh spent extra time examining her pack configuration and gear arrangement. "Mitchell, this actually looks pretty good," Walsh said, sounding slightly surprised. "Did someone help you with this?" Elena had to think quickly. Her pack was indeed well organized, but not so perfectly that it would indicate professional training. "Rodriguez showed me how he learned it in Boy Scouts," she replied, gesturing to her fellow recruit. "I figured it made sense to learn from someone who knew what he was doing." Rodriguez looked confused for a moment, but nodded along when Elena shot him a quick look. Walsh seemed satisfied with this explanation and moved on to the next recruit. The bus ride to the field training site gave Elena an opportunity to observe the landscape and note potential security issues. She also paid attention to the radio communications between the instructors and base personnel, trying to pick up information about schedules, procedures, and personnel assignments. During the ride, Elena overheard Sergeant Chun making another one of his mysterious phone calls. This time, she was close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. Chun seemed to be discussing timing and locations, mentioning something about packages and delivery schedules. It could be innocent logistics coordination, but the secretive nature of the calls continued to raise Elena's suspicions. The field training site was a realistic mock village constructed specifically for military exercises. It included buildings that could be used for urban combat training, obstacles for tactical movement, and various scenarios designed to test recruit skills under pressure. Elena had operated in similar environments during actual missions, but she had to constantly remind herself to react as a civilian would. Their first exercise was a basic patrol movement through the village while instructors observed and evaluated their performance. Elena positioned herself in the middle of the patrol formation and made sure to demonstrate the hesitation and uncertainty that would be natural for someone experiencing this type of training for the first time. "Mitchell, keep your spacing," called Master Sergeant Collins as they moved through a simulated alley. "You're bunching up too close to Rodriguez. Maintain 5-meter intervals." Elena adjusted her position appropriately, but she had to consciously override her instincts that wanted to maintain proper tactical spacing automatically. Throughout the exercise, she forced herself to make small mistakes and show gradual, improvement rather than demonstrating competence that would be suspicious. During a break between exercises, Elena noticed Morrison having an intense conversation with one of the civilian contractors who had accompanied the group to provide technical support. The conversation looked more familiar than professional, and Elena got the impression that these two men knew each other from outside the training environment. Elena positioned herself where she could observe without being obvious about it. The contractor was a middle-aged man she hadn't seen before, dressed in typical civilian field clothing but carrying himself with the bearing of someone who had military experience. He handed Morrison something small that Morrison quickly pocketed before they separated, and tried to look casual. This exchange was definitely worth investigating further. But Elena had to be patient and wait for an appropriate opportunity. She made a mental note of the contractor's appearance and began planning how she could learn more about his role and relationship with Morrison. The afternoon exercises included simulated combat scenarios where recruits had to respond to enemy contact, provide medical aid to wounded teammates, and coordinate basic tactical movements. Elena found these exercises particularly challenging because her special operations training wanted to take control, but she managed to maintain her cover by channeling her real skills into helping other recruits rather than demonstrating exceptional personal performance. During one exercise, Jessica was designated as a casualty and Elena was assigned to provide medical treatment. Elena had extensive combat medical training, but Sarah Mitchell would have only basic first aid knowledge. She performed the required procedures correctly, but with the hesitation and uncertainty of someone applying classroom knowledge for the first time. "Good job, Mitchell," said the medic instructor who was evaluating their performance. "Your technique needs work, but you kept calm under pressure and followed the proper sequence. That's what counts." Elena nodded and thanked the instructor, internally relieved that she had managed to perform well enough to be helpful without performing so well as to raise questions about her background. That evening, the recruits were given time to clean equipment and prepare for the next day's exercises. Elena volunteered for water duty, which gave her a legitimate reason to move around the camp and observe activities in different areas. During her movements, she noticed that the contractor who had spoken with Morrison was setting up some kind of communications equipment away from the main camp area. Elena found a position where she could observe without being detected and watch the contractor work. He was clearly experienced with the equipment, setting up what appeared to be a satellite communication system with practiced efficiency. Once the equipment was operational, he made a series of calls that he obviously didn't want overheard by the training staff. Elena couldn't get close enough to hear the conversations, but she noted the time, duration, and general nature of the activities. This contractor was definitely worth investigating further, and his connection to Morrison was becoming more suspicious. Later that evening, Elena had an opportunity to search Morrison's equipment while he was occupied with other duties. She found what he had received from the contractor, a small electronic device that looked like a standard GPS unit but had modifications that weren't immediately obvious. Elena photographed the device quickly and noted its serial numbers before carefully replacing it exactly where she had found it. Elena spent the rest of the evening reviewing what she had learned and planning her next moves. The field exercise was providing valuable intelligence opportunities, but she was also starting to feel pressure from maintaining her cover under increasingly challenging circumstances. She needed to find a way to investigate Morrison and the contractor more thoroughly without compromising her mission. As she settled into her sleeping bag that night, Elena listened to the quiet sounds of the camp and reflected on the complexity of her situation. She was gathering solid intelligence about potential security breaches, but she was also discovering that the training environment contained multiple layers of activity that weren't immediately apparent. Her mission was evolving from a simple investigation into something much more complex and potentially dangerous. The next 2 days of field training would likely bring more opportunities to gather intelligence, but they would also increase the risk of her cover being compromised. Elena knew she needed to be more careful while also being more aggressive in pursuing the leads she had discovered. The balance was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, and she sensed that she was approaching a critical point in her investigation. The final day of field training began with an advanced tactical exercise that would push the recruits beyond anything they had experienced so far. Elena sensed that this would be a crucial test of her ability to maintain her cover while gathering the intelligence she needed to complete her mission. The exercise was designed as a complex scenario involving multiple objectives: rescuing hostages from a simulated terrorist compound, securing sensitive documents, and extracting safely while under enemy fire. Elena recognized the scenario as similar to actual operations she had conducted, which made the challenge of performing like an inexperienced recruit even more difficult. Staff Sergeant Walsh briefed 3rd Platoon on their role in the exercise. They would be responsible for the document recovery portion of the mission, which required them to infiltrate a building, locate specific materials, and extract without being detected by the opposing force played by instructors and advanced training personnel. This exercise will separate those of you who have what it takes from those who should consider other career options, Walsh announced. You'll be evaluated on tactical movement, teamwork, problem-solving under pressure, and your ability to complete objectives while maintaining security. Elena was assigned to a 4-person team with Morrison, Rodriguez, and Thompson. This gave her an excellent opportunity to observe Morrison more closely and see how he performed under pressure. She also needed to be careful that her own performance didn't reveal her true capabilities. As the exercise began, Elena's team moved toward their objective building using the cover and movement techniques they had been taught. Elena found herself naturally falling into point position, where her special operations training wanted her to be, but she forced herself to follow Morrison's lead since he had been designated as team leader. Morrison's leadership immediately raised more red flags for Elena. His tactical decisions were sophisticated, his situational awareness was exceptional, and his movement techniques were far more advanced than anything they had been taught in basic training. He was clearly drawing on experience and training that went well beyond his claimed civilian background. Morrison, how did you know to check that corner before we moved past it? Rodriguez whispered as they paused behind cover. It just seemed like the smart thing to do, Morrison replied, but his tone suggested he was being evasive. Can't be too careful in this kind of situation. Elena noticed that Morrison was also watching her carefully, as if he was evaluating her performance just as much as she was evaluating his. This mutual observation created an undercurrent of tension that made the exercise even more challenging. When they reached the objective building, Morrison quickly developed a plan for entry and search that demonstrated tactical thinking beyond recruit level. Elena found herself in the position of having to either support a plan that was likely to succeed or suggest modifications that might reveal her own advanced training. She chose to ask questions that Sarah Mitchell would reasonably ask, while subtly steering the team toward approaches that would be safer and more effective. This allowed her to contribute valuable input while maintaining the appearance of being a cautious but inexperienced team member. Are you sure we should all go in the front door? Elena asked. What if someone is watching from the back of the building? Morrison paused and looked at her with increased interest. That's actually a really good point. Maybe we should split up and approach from 2 directions. The team successfully completed their objective, but Elena noticed that Morrison continued to watch her throughout the exercise. She had the uncomfortable feeling that her questions and suggestions might have been more tactically sophisticated than she had intended. During the extraction phase of the exercise, the opposing force initiated contact and the recruits had to fight their way to the designated pickup point. Elena found this part of the exercise particularly challenging because her instincts wanted to take charge and use her combat experience to get the team to safety efficiently. Instead, she followed Morrison's lead while making suggestions that would help the team without revealing her capabilities. When Thompson was designated as wounded, Elena provided medical aid that was competent but not expertly professional. When they needed to bound from cover to cover under simulated enemy fire, Elena moved with appropriate caution rather than the tactical precision her training demanded. The exercise concluded successfully, with 3rd Platoon achieving their objectives and receiving positive evaluation from the instructors. During the debrief, Master Sergeant Collins specifically mentioned Morrison's leadership and Elena's teamwork as standout examples of good performance. Mitchell showed real tactical thinking out there, Collins said, asking the right questions and supporting her team leader effectively. That's exactly what we want to see. Elena thanked the instructor while internally worrying that her performance might have been too sophisticated for someone with no military background. She noticed Morrison watching her reaction carefully after the debrief. Elena had another opportunity to observe the mysterious contractor. This time, he was meeting with Sergeant Chun near the communications equipment, and Elena was able to get close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. "The schedule needs to change," Chun was saying. "Too much attention from higher headquarters lately. We need to be more careful about timing." "The clients are getting impatient," the contractor replied. "They want the next delivery by Friday, or they're going to find another source." Elena felt a chill as she realized she was overhearing what sounded like arrangements for selling military information to outside parties. Chun and the contractor were discussing deliveries and clients in a way that suggested ongoing criminal activity. Elena carefully withdrew before she could be detected. But she now had solid evidence that Sergeant Chun was involved in the security leak her mission was designed to investigate. The challenge was gathering enough proof to make a case while maintaining her cover, and ensuring the safety of the legitimate recruits. That evening, as the training group prepared to return to the main base, Elena found herself in a dangerous situation. Morrison approached her privately and initiated a conversation that made it clear he had been evaluating her performance throughout the exercise. "You handled yourself pretty well out there today," Morrison said casually. "Better than most people with no military experience." "I just tried to think things through logically," Elena replied, maintaining her cover story. "Some of it seemed like common sense." "Maybe," Morrison said, but his tone suggested skepticism. "Or maybe you've had more experience than you're letting on. I know what trained movement looks like, and you've got some of the signs." Elena felt her heart rate increase as she realized that Morrison was actively suspicious of her background. She needed to deflect his suspicions without confirming them, while also trying to learn more about his own suspicious activities. "I'm not sure what you mean," Elena said. "I'm just trying to be a good soldier and help my team succeed." Morrison studied her face carefully before responding. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to talk about things that aren't in official files, I might be a good person to have that conversation with." This statement suggested that Morrison might be fishing to see if Elena was also operating under false identity, which raised the possibility that he might be an undercover operative as well. Elena realized that her mission had just become significantly more complex and potentially dangerous. As they loaded onto the buses for return to the main base, Elena reviewed the intelligence she had gathered and the new complications that had emerged. She had solid evidence that Sergeant Chun was involved in selling military secrets, but she also had a fellow recruit who suspected her true identity and might be operating undercover himself. Elena knew she was approaching the critical phase of her mission, where she would need to gather final proof of the security breach while avoiding exposure of her own operation. The next few days would determine whether she could successfully complete her assignment or whether the entire mission would be compromised by the complex web of deception she had uncovered at the training facility. Back at the main base, Elena knew she was running out of time. The intelligence she had gathered about Sergeant Chun's activities needed to be acted upon quickly, but she still needed concrete evidence that would hold up in a military court. More importantly, she had to deal with Morrison's growing suspicions about her true identity. Elena decided to take a calculated risk. That evening, during personal time, she approached Morrison for a private conversation. She had developed a theory about his background and decided to test it directly. "You mentioned yesterday that you recognize trained movement when you see it," Elena said. finding Morrison alone in the equipment storage area. What kind of training are you talking about? Morrison looked around to ensure they weren't being overheard before responding. The kind that teaches you how to operate behind enemy lines and complete missions without backup support. Elena felt a mix of relief and concern as her suspicions about Morrison were confirmed. You're not really a college football player, are you? And you're not really a small-town girl from Ohio looking for direction in life, Morrison replied. The question is, are we working for the same people or different ones? Elena made a quick decision to partially reveal her true mission. I'm here investigating a security breach. Someone at this facility has been selling classified information to foreign contacts. Are you working on the same case? Morrison nodded slowly. Different agency, same problem. My handler sent me to investigate reports of weapons and equipment going missing from training facilities. We think there's a network operating across multiple bases. Elena realized that their separate investigations might be connected. Have you identified any specific suspects? Sergeant Chun is definitely involved, Morrison said. I've been tracking his communications and financial records. He's been receiving payments from sources that don't match his official salary. What about you? Elena described what she had observed about Chun's phone calls, his meetings with the civilian contractor, and the conversations she had overheard about deliveries and clients. Morrison's eyes widened as she provided details that corroborated his own investigation. We need to coordinate our next moves, Morrison said. If we work together, we can gather the evidence we need without compromising each other's covers. Elena agreed, but she insisted on verifying Morrison's credentials before sharing any more sensitive information. Morrison provided her with a contact procedure she could use to confirm his identity with her own handlers. Elena did the same, giving Morrison a way to verify that she was legitimately working for military intelligence. Over the next 2 days, Elena and Morrison carefully coordinated their investigation while maintaining their covers as regular recruits. Elena focused on gathering evidence about the information security breach, while Morrison concentrated on tracking the missing weapons and equipment. Elena's breakthrough came when she managed to access Chun's personal communications during a late-night surveillance operation. Using skills from her special operations training, she was able to monitor Chun's encrypted messages and discover detailed evidence of his espionage activities. Chun had been providing training schedules, security procedures, and personnel information to foreign contacts in exchange for substantial payments. Morrison simultaneously gathered evidence showing that Chun was also involved in stealing weapons and ammunition from training facilities, which were then sold to criminal organizations. The scope of Chun's operation was much larger than either of their separate investigations had initially suggested. The evidence they gathered revealed that Chun was working with the civilian contractor Elena had observed, along with several other personnel across multiple military installations. They had created a network that was systematically stealing both physical materials and classified information for sale to foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations. Elena and Morrison realized they needed to coordinate with their respective agencies to plan the arrest and ensure that the entire network was captured simultaneously. They also had to be careful not to alert Chun or his associates that they had been discovered. The plan they developed called for Elena to maintain her cover and continue gathering intelligence while Morrison would arrange for coordinated raids across all the facilities where network members had been identified. The timing would be critical to prevent any of the conspirators from escaping or destroying evidence. On Friday evening, Elena received word that the coordinated operation was scheduled for the following Monday. This meant she had to maintain her cover as recruit Sarah Mitchell for 3 more days while the final preparations were completed. Saturday brought the most challenging test yet of Elena's ability to maintain her cover. Staff Sergeant Walsh announced that 3rd Platoon would be participating in a special training exercise with visiting instructors from other facilities. Elena realized this could be a final opportunity for Chun to gather sensitive information before the network was exposed. During the exercise, Elena observed Chun carefully and noticed that he was indeed using his position to gather information about the visiting personnel and their procedures. She documented his activities while participating in the training as Sarah Mitchell, maintaining the delicate balance between her cover and her mission requirements. Sunday evening, Elena made her final surveillance of Chun's activities. She watched as he met with the civilian contractor one last time to transfer information and coordinate what she assumed were final arrangements before they planned to disappear. Elena photographed the meeting and recorded as much of their conversation as possible. Monday morning arrived with unusual tension in the air. Elena and Morrison went through their normal training routine, but both were aware that arrest teams were positioned around the facility and that the operation would begin at a predetermined signal dot at 1000 hours. Elena heard the code word transmitted over the facility's communication system. Within minutes, military, police, and federal agents moved simultaneously across the base and at other facilities around the country. Elena watched from the training area as Chun was arrested while attempting to destroy evidence in his office. The civilian contractor was taken into custody as he tried to leave the base with a vehicle full of stolen equipment. Additional arrests were made throughout the facility as other network members were identified and captured. Staff Sergeant Walsh stood with the recruits watching the arrests unfold, clearly shocked by the revelation that one of her colleagues had been involved in espionage and theft. "I guess this explains some of the security briefings we've been getting lately," she said to Master Sergeant Collins. Elena maintained her cover as Sarah Mitchell, expressing appropriate surprise and concern about the dramatic events. She asked the same questions other recruits were asking and showed the same confusion about what was happening. Later that day, Elena and Morrison were quietly extracted from the training facility. Elena's cover as Sarah Mitchell was ended, and she was debriefed on the successful completion of her mission. The evidence she and Morrison had gathered led to the conviction of Chun and 15 other members of the espionage network. The investigation revealed that the network had been operating for over 2 years and had compromised significant amounts of classified information and stolen military equipment worth millions of dollars. Elena's patient work maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence had been crucial to exposing the entire operation. Staff Sergeant Walsh never learned that one of her recruits had actually been an elite special operations agent conducting an undercover investigation. She continued training new soldiers, unaware that her demanding methods had provided perfect cover for one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in recent military history. Elena returned to her normal duties with a sense of satisfaction at having completed a complex and challenging mission. The training facility returned to normal operations, now with enhanced security procedures to prevent similar breaches in the future. The recruits who had trained alongside Sarah Mitchell continued their military careers, never knowing they had served with one of the military's most skilled special operations agents. The mission had tested Elena's abilities in ways that pure combat operations never could, requiring her to suppress her natural capabilities while methodically gathering intelligence in a hostile environment. Her success proved that sometimes the most dangerous missions were fought not with weapons, but with patience, observation, and the ability to become invisible in plain sight.